How we doing?
You guys look good out there. Day 3.
Most people made it back. Not bad.
How was the patio for those who went? Was it fun? Yeah? Some little birdie sent me a picture, and you guys look like you were having fun. I enjoyed seeing that. Yeah.
Don't name any names.
No. We thought about showing it up here, but we thought that was no good, so we didn't do that. But it was very cute, very good.
All right. This is it, folks. Is everybody ready? Day 3, psychologically? All right. It's going to be fun.
Okay, so over the next 45 minutes, we're going to hear from 3 organizations who are leveraging mapping tools for social and environmental impact. This day 3 is our last day, so we're excited to share their stories with you.
And to introduce everyone, I'd like to invite our wonderful coworker, Tanya, up on the stage.
Let's hear it for Tanya!
Good morning. I hope you had a wonderful morning so far. So I have the honor to invite 4 amazing speakers this morning. We have Eric Dinerstein, who is the chief scientist at WWF for 25 years. Then at Resolve, he's led a scientific team that has forever changed the policy environment for conservation, providing this fundamental science behind the movement to protect 30% of the planet's land and seas on the way to half the planet for nature. So not only is Eric quite literally a force for nature, he's a champion for tiger conservation, and he's also an incredible naturalist. So if you're walking around with him and you want to ask him about valley oaks or live oaks or other species, and there's your chance. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Eric Dinerstein.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I didn't hear a word she said through the curtain, so I don't know if I'll ask her later at dinner tonight. Okay, my name's Eric, and thrilled to be here. It's my first time at Geo for Good. I'm going to start out doing something that nobody's done yet, probably, but we're going to do a thought experiment. So, timekeepers, please give me an extra minute because this is an audience participation thing. I'm going to ask you, imagine that 10 years from that Tanya Birch and Rebecca Moore have invited you to come back 10 years from now. And I want you to think about, for the next 30 seconds, what your hopes are of what the world would look like 10 years from now. What have we achieved in the environmental sector that might make this a more sustainable biosphere? So, old-fashioned, write it down on a piece of paper or tap it into your laptops, but think about this for the next few seconds, and then periodically review that over each year until 10 years from now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is present the view that myself and my colleagues have shared for what that could look like 10 years from now, called a global safety net for biodiversity and climate. I guess it's instead of Geo for Good, Geo for saving life on Earth. The idea for this came about in 2014. Many of you know Andrew Steer, the former CEO of World Resources Institute and now the CEO of the Bezos Earth Fund. And when he was at WRI and it was a Global Forest Watch meeting, somewhat like this, he grabbed me and said, Eric, I just came back from the Paris talks. And it's amazing. We now have the Paris climate deal. So this was 2014. He says, why isn't there something like this for biodiversity? And it really stumped me. And I guess the easy answer is to say, well, it's a lot easier to measure CO2 and methane than it is to measure and monitor biodiversity. But probably the more apt answer is that the climate scientists tend to have their shit together, and biodiversity conservationists spend most of their time arguing with each other. To try to change that, we came up with this idea. Everybody loves a challenge, so we created the Global Deal for Nature in 2019 that offered how to save life on Earth, terrestrial, freshwater, marine, species conservation for focal species, and policies that would create an enabling environment for a global deal. So we now have something on par with the Paris Accords if we can just move it forward. And what it called for was protecting 50% of the Earth. So that's where nature needs half came from. The next step we took was to make that spatially explicit, at least for the terrestrial part. And so we came up with the global safety net that was published the next year that showed where these polygons are and what we should be protecting. And this was the map. This is the global safety net, and it does a couple of things. It offers a way to, since terrestrial habitats sequester a quarter of all carbon emissions each year and the other quarter in marine. But on the terrestrial side, it showed how we could address staying below 1.5 degrees, contribute to that, how we could avert biodiversity loss and prevent extinctions in the 6th extinction crisis, how we could avoid ecosystem collapse, and how we could prevent future pandemics. And we did this by creating all an Earth engine, a base map of the protected areas of the world, which is about 15% in 2018 when we did this, and then layer over that widely used, published, peer-reviewed global biodiversity layers to come up with these different color patterns that represent different biodiversity features that we need to conserve. And you can look at the paper to go into more detail for that. But what it also showed, something that a lot of you already know, is that that the goal of conserving biodiversity and also stabilizing the climate are interdependent. We can't do one without the other. It makes common sense is that the most biodiverse habitats sequester the most carbon. And we were able to do this in the global safety net. You can break down by your region, by a country, by ecoregions if you're familiar with ecoregions. And it's a useful guiding map, base map for conservation efforts at scale. So how many of you are from California? Raise your hand. How many of you are from California in a previous life? That's a pretty good amount here. Okay, so Californians and former Californians, you're doing a great job. California has about 23% under protection, but it could reach the goal of 50% in California protected in the next few years. Now, these yellow lines that look kind of like angel hair pasta, hopefully you'll never think of angel hair pasta again without thinking of connectivity. But it's the color that we use to say, how could we connect all the protected areas of the world with corridors 2.5 kilometers wide, which is the width we chose because that's what elephants need to move through habitats in India. There are no elephants here in California, but it would allow for climate corridors for species to migrate in the event of climate change as well. One of the most important findings of the Global Safety Net paper was that 30% of the safety net is either in areas, lands that are claimed by, titled by, or occupied by indigenous people and local communities. So the single most important thing we could do really to save life on Earth is to empower indigenous people and local communities, those who want to do so, to be part of this giant safety net to stabilize the climate and prevent biodiversity loss. And we know from published peer-reviewed papers that indigenous peoples and indigenous reserves do a better job of conserving biodiversity than federal and state reserves in paired comparisons. The other critical point of this paper was that in that 50% that we need to protect, we only need to protect about another 2.3% or so, we thought, of habitat shown in these magenta polygons here, where we have concentrations of species that are rare, are narrow-range endemics, or are on the IUCN Red List. Only 2.3% would largely avert the extinction crisis. And they're concentrated in a number of areas, like this particular area here in the northern Andes that's the richest in the world for rare species. So remember that number, 2.3%, because we're going to come back to this. So for those of you who are not conservation biologists, here's conservation biology in basically one sentence, is that most species on Earth are rare. By that we mean they either have very narrow ranges, they occur at low densities, or both. And so the major focus of conservation biology is to prevent the extinction of rare species. They're concentrated on about 1,300 tropical archipelagos around the world, where species are narrow-range endemics and where they're likely to go extinct the first. So we asked them the question in a paper that hopefully will be out in the next 2 months called Conservation Imperatives. And we took a look at that 2.3%, what we need to achieve to say, how well are we doing? How well have we done in the last 5 years to protect those? Where do they occur? Do we actually estimate the habitat correctly? And how much would it cost to protect them? So that's the basis of, and I want to just share with you the headlines of this paper that's coming out. Okay, so if you look at this map and you're sitting probably even in the front rows here, I challenge you to find some green polygons. Can you see some? Okay, mostly what you see is this fuchsia or magenta. So this is a test we did of, we compared the protected areas in 2018 and 2023, how much has been added, to ask a simple question, with all the emphasis on preventing extinction and the extinction crisis and the 6th grade extinction crisis. How well are we doing? A hypothesis would be that in this 5-year interval from 2018 to 2023, that we would see maybe 50% of these pink polygons would be green. In fact, it's the opposite. It's almost as if countries are using a reverse selection algorithm to pick the places that are least rare species, and going wherever. So when you hear the talks today for about 30 by 30, or 30% by 2030, keep this in mind, that it's a new rallying cry for conservation biologists, is that quality is more important than quantity. So area-based targets are fine, but if they're not focusing on the places where species are going to go extinct the fastest, we're in big problems. So we have to reverse that. So that's the bad news, is that over that 5-year interval, rather than 50% being protected, only 7% was actually protected of sites of rarity. We also overestimated that amount of area. We applied a new fractional land cover analysis in Google in Earth Engine, and found that something that people told us about, which was that a number of areas were actually overestimated, the area that's available. And so we corrected for that, and that 2.3% went down to 1.2%. And in the tropics, now only 0.74%, which is where 79% of all the sites occur, 16,582 sites are located. It's only half of that. So we only have to protect 1.2%. Those of you who are familiar with ecoregions, in each of the major biogeographic realms, there are 10 ecoregions in each one that have the abundance of sites. So you can see how concentrated they are. So if you're from these ecoregions, this is part, hopefully, of your hopes for the next 10 years is go back and work in these places and save these rare species. There are 10 countries that have 72% of the conservation imperative sites, and 30 countries have 90%. So it's highly concentrated, and we can protect these areas through the means that are mentioned in this slide. But perhaps the most important message is that this is doable and affordable. We used data from 1,000 different land purchases that from Rainforest Trust, from World Land Trust, IUCN, and our own Quick Response Fund for Nature, and found that the cost would only be about $35 billion a year for 5 years to avoid the 6th grade extinction. So that's what in the United States, for comparison, we spend that much on pet grooming and dog food. So we can easily do this. It's affordable. Okay, last point. Yeah. Just to remember that we're not just looking at pixels and maps, but there are things that live in them. I spent a lot of my career studying tigers and wildlife in Asia, and another element that needs to be brought into this global vision for saving life on Earth is rewilding. But rewilding requires coexistence. So here's some pictures of tigers taken with a new, this is in the journal Bioscience that came out last month, of using, those of you who are familiar with Wildlife Insights, this is kind of like Wildlife Insights but on the edge, but focused down, boiled down to about 16 species that are most involved in human-wildlife conflict where you need real-time alerts. So you have doubling of tiger population in India, and so we're able to alert villagers when tigers are moving out into buffer zones, because 40% of the tigers of India, which holds 70% of the world tigers, never set foot in national parks. So we will protect you. But it also can alert things with elephants. Today, our team is putting cameras into West Bengal, India, where you have the highest incidence of elephants killing people. In India each year, 650 people are killed by elephants. So if we're going to have rewilding, we have to be sensitive to these issues, and we have to introduce technologies that allow for coexistence with wildlife. So my hope is, and that's the technology, which you can read about in bioscience. So there's a tiny Intel computer vision chip that runs a 67 megabyte neural network that identifies a whole bunch of species, but I won't go into that. So last slide is, my hope is that 10 years from now, what we'll be talking about here is we've succeeded, all our hopes are achieved in trying to conserve these fundamental elements of nature. We're on the path to 1.5. We avoided ecosystem collapse. We've avoided the 6th grade extinction. And what we're focused on now is all these cool technologies that we can use to help better monitor and measure our efforts in the recovery of wild nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
So I'll take the tiger. I'll just take him.
They'll get the tiger. Thank you so much, Eric. Let's give Eric another warm round of applause. Thank you. So we've seen some global approaches to 30 by 30, and now let's zoom a level closer to the regional scale. And I want to welcome Lauren Terbasket of the Lower Similkameen Indian Band to the stage. Lauren is a lead negotiator for the proposed South Okanagan Similkameen Grassland Park Reserve and the Ashnola Watershed Project, or protected area, with the help of an organization called Teradapt. So she'll be joined by Nathan Hahn from Teradapt, who's working with Lauren in the Lower Similkameen Band to support their monitoring and restoration initiatives. So Lauren and Nathan, welcome to Geo for Good. This is forward, and then there's no back, just fast.
Good morning, my name is Lauren Terbasket, and this is?
Hi, I'm Nathan Hahn.
And I am from the Similkameen. Kantil Similkameen, the National Okanagan. So good morning. My name is Lauren, and I am working, as was mentioned, on a national park reserve. I come from an area in the North Cascades in between Washington State and British Columbia. So we're going to talk about protecting lands and restoring biodiversity through dynamic and static monitoring. And so we'll give you some slides and information about the work that we're undertaking. So a couple of things I think that are really important prior to talking about land and talking about maps and talking about polygons and dots on a map is that I come from a tribal group, the Similkameen people, which is part of the Okanagan Nation Alliance. We're part of the Colville Confederated Tribes. Our tribe is split between Canada and the US border. And so we have been working with our tribe in Washington State to look at the impacts on the North Cascades system. What we know in our work on the Cascades and from the Colville tribes, the data that we have is that if water warming trends continue into the next decade, the way they have in the last 20 years, what we foresee in the Cascade system is an extinction event on our waters by 2040. We also face in our region extensive mining impacts, contamination, such as nitrates, sulfates, cyanide, mercury, to name a few. So we are also experiencing, because we're a confluence where I come from of northern cold desert, grasslands, as well as high mountain, the Cascade system, is that it is an area that contains this plentitude of biodiversity that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And because of the development, because of water overallocation, on the Similkameen River system where I come from, water is overallocated by over 300%, which means that if everyone who was allocated water took the water that they were permitted to take, we would have no water. And what we're seeing right now this year is a stage 5 drought, so we're seeing the depletion of our aquifers within this system. Other threats in the area include overlogging, overharvesting, and we can see through some of the dynamic mapping, and I'll show that in a minute, is the extensive impact of fire since 2014 and its impact on our total water systems. So one of the biggest impacts for us, so the area that you see in the mapping on screen is, you see a map, and it has a large green section with a yellow section. So we're negotiating right now to protect some of those lands and those watersheds through a national park reserve that will be managed through Indigenous law, using Indigenous quality standards, and managed undertaking Indigenous practice. We're also looking at protection, and so that initial area is around 22,000 hectares. But the other area is the Ashinola protected area. And so we had attempted to work with the province of British Columbia and Canada over a number of years to collaborate, understanding what those threats were on our system. We were unable to gain much traction or support from those governments in Canada and British Columbia to address our concerns. And so what we did in 2022 was we declared the Ashinola area watershed an Indigenous protected area. And so that area covers about 180,000 hectares. So considering 180,000 hectares of Indigenous protected area, as well as 20,000 hectares of National Park Reserve that is managed and operated according to Indigenous law, use Indigenous quality standards, and Indigenous practices on the land, such as traditional burns, water diversions, and management harvest practices, we're looking to both protect and to restore these areas. And so we're working with a group, Teradapt, to help us, as well as a group called Corvidae and Caribou Carbon Solutions, to manage these areas, not just for restoration for harvestable timber, for marketable timber, but to actually restore our homelands for biodiversity and to restore our homelands for their water carrying capacity. What we know, there's two primary threats. One is the water warming trends. So we're undertaking the work in mapping to look at ways to restore water systems for their cooling factor. And we're also looking at ways to restore lands so that it secures lands from landslides, from extensive landslides. We're also looking at one other threat, which is mining. And so the mining work is really, we expect that the Copper Mountain mining tailings pond will fail. All tailings ponds fail. And that Copper Mountain mine will be the second tallest tailings pond in the world. And so when that pond fails, it will basically eliminate the whole of the river and the subsurface water. So what is the work that we're doing? That's one of the reasons that we have declared the Ashinola as a protected area, because Indigenous people are not transient people. Mainstream cultural society, they move from place to place, but for us, what we do is that we live in place for thousands of years. So this has been the work that we've been undertaking. We're undertaking 150,000 hectares of protection, 22,000 in the National Grassland Park. And what that does is it allows for over 1 million hectares of connectivity corridor from the central interior of the province down into Washington State and into the Pasayten Wilderness in Washington State. Similkameen area is one of the biodiversity hotspots, one of 3 primary biodiversity hotspots in Canada. It's one of the 3 most threatened biodiversity hotspots. It contains over 30% of all red-listed species in the province of British Columbia, and is home to over 42 terrestrial and aquatic threatened and endangered species in the province. the landscape is changing. And so what we're seeing is that the weather patterns are warming as well as the water is warming. And so what we're looking for is what are the ways that dynamic mapping can show us over time what those weather patterns are, but also what are those water warming trends in our creek and river systems. We can see from our landscape that we have over 30 years, and in this map that shows the logging and the fires that have gone through our area. And so likely over close to 90% of our landscape has been changed since the early 2000s due to fire and extensive overharvest. So we have chosen 3 primary species to work with. One is grizzly, one is whitebark pine, and the other is huckleberry. And so what this map shows is that the fires and the overlogging, although they're devastating to landscape, when the land comes back, it creates these really healthy corridors for grizzly bear migration and grizzly bear protection. Grizzly bears had been thought to be extirpated in the Similkameen area. Our people traditionally know that those lands have been that grizzly have existed on the landscape. What we see and what we're doing then is to restore for a number of things. One is for grizzly bear habitat. They use whitebark pine in the fall before they go into hibernation. We also share a common, love of huckleberries between human and grizzly. And what we're looking to do is restore forest for biodiversity, so we're restoring soils, but we're also restoring for fire suppression, looking at types of timber and types of forests that will allow for either lower intensity fires or for fire breaks throughout our forest systems given a global warming climate. So how are we using the data? Basically, we're collecting point and polygon data with links using Google Earth mapping. We're creating overlays that show slope. We're restoring huckleberries. We want them to be on a general slope. We want them to have proximity to roads. And we want them to have proximity to water. So we're using mapping to really identify those highest priority areas where these plants have the highest probability of success. We're showing changing landscapes to identify high priorities for restoration and protection. And we're looking to utilize dynamic mapping and static mapping to monitor changes over time. When we're implementing prescriptions on the land, how is it that we are able to monitor whether we're successful or whether we're not? And so here's some of the other work that TerraDapt has undertaken. Nathan.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. And we're really excited to be working with the Lower Similkameen, and thank you again for allowing us to share the stage with you today. So TerraDapt, just to back up, I think the motivation behind TerraDapt is really exemplified in this project with Lower Similkameen. It's a dynamic landscape tool, and it's designed to help communities, governments, and organizations create conservation plans that can adapt to changing environments and monitor progress over time. And the idea for TerraDapt was actually sparked at a Geo for Good in 2017. And it was really born out of this frustration with decades of seeing these good conservation plans made obsolete very quickly by changing landscapes, development, fire, logging, all of that. So conservation planning really requires drilling into a landscape. And so starting in this Cascadia region of Washington State and southern British Columbia, we built out over 20 dynamic layers that go from 1985 to 2022, cover everything from landscape, land cover, disturbance, forest types, and some species habitat suitability and connectivity models. And these are updated each year to capture the latest changes to see how things are adapting as new fires come through. And this is, of course, being powered by Earth Engine and the Google Cloud platform, or we wouldn't be here today. So with these layers, we've been working with partners from Cascadia, government, tribes, to help inform, basically help them monitor the landscape over time. So like this animation on the left here is just showing logging over time around Mount Rainier National Park. You can see that large scale loss. And we also have this dashboard way of viewing. So if we have stacks of layers, the dashboard helps summarize those changes over a given amount of time, so we can see where loss and gain is happening. Here with sage grouse habitat suitability, which has been heavily impacted by solar development and also long-term agricultural programs. But seeing these changes over time not only helps managers report on their area and assess the outcomes of management, it also helps stories and spur action, like the graphics that Lauren was just showing us. So with the Similkameen Band, we're helping develop products specifically for their work. So we'll be working on a grizzly connectivity layer and burn severity layers that can help identify those priority areas for restoration. But as Lauren said, these are just essentially points and polygons on a map, and we need partners on the ground to actually make these things happen. People who actually know the land, are part of the land to carry out those actions. So yeah, we're really looking forward to this, how this work. So thanks everyone, and yeah, feel free to reach out to either of us. We looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Great. Do you have the clicker? Oh, you got it. Thanks, Nathan. Great. Thank you so much, Loren and Nathan. Another big round of applause for them. So that's a really great example of showing us how dynamic mapping is being used by the Similkameen people. And now I'd like to welcome David Walters to the stage. David's doing really innovative work protecting a primary broadleaf forest in Jamaica. So David, over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is David, and I wanted to start by saying thanks for the opportunity to share some perspectives from the developing world, some perspectives from a small island in the Caribbean called Jamaica. And these are perspectives of conservation managers from the ground using Google tools. The main one I'm talking about this morning is Google Earth. So just some context, we have mountains in Jamaica, believe it or not. It's not just beaches. And what you're looking at is the eastern section of the island. And this area is called the Blue and Jonker Mountains National Park. And it also has a World Heritage Site. And it's one of few mixed sites, and it's important for its outstanding universal value in terms of natural heritage, but also the cultural importance to the people of Jamaica. The inner green section is actually the core conservation area, and that is the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the outer lighter green area is the national park boundary. This blue buffer zone that you're noticing is where the communities are. These are neighboring communities. There's nobody living inside the national park. So it's about 41,000 hectares of national park, and it's really important for its biodiversity. It's also a key biodiversity area, and lots of ecosystem services for the people of Jamaica. One of those main ecosystem services is water provisioning. Why is this area important? So it's super important for us in Jamaica because of all these ecosystem services, but also it faces a number of threats. There's land clearing, there's degradation, some animals are threatened by it. So if you look in the top photo, you'll notice some of our national park rangers confiscating some birds. These are protected birds that have been taken from community members who took them illegally. This land clearing is often driven by agricultural activities. Oftentimes it's smallholders. Sometimes it's bigger agribusiness related to coffee. There are threats to the fauna through, as I mentioned, illegal hunting. There's poisoning of streams and water resources. And the enabling conditions are not that great. So I work for an NGO in Jamaica called the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust. And we're a small NGO, less than 30 people, managing this entire space. And we have this agreement with the government where we conduct management activities, and it's a wide scope of activities, everything from environmental monitoring to conservation activities to law enforcement, recreation and tourism, lots of things. I'm incredibly proud of my team. It's people who go above and beyond to make conservation work. This context is really important because it means that we're kind of scrappy, we're kind of agile, we're trying to do a lot of things with few resources. And one of the main things that we've been trying to do in terms of our strategy is seeing how best can we leverage technology and technological tools to improve what we're doing in terms of conserving the space. So there's a couple of things that we do, and the general workflow kind of looks like, okay, we go out into the field, make observations, look at what's happening, collect some data, analyze this data, and then we report and we do something. That's generally what happens. So we're collecting information using some field tools that we built based on AppSheet. And this works offline in the field, and we collect this data. We're analyzing the data using things like QGIS, and then we're reporting using Google Looker and other kinds of tools. So this is just an example of like a patrol map producing QGIS showing like what are the issues that we're seeing in the space in terms of breaches of environmental legislation. That's also a screenshot from eBird. So we use eBird quite a bit to record bird species. It's kind of a biomonitoring approach where the birds are indicators of environmental health. Has anybody seen anything like this before? No? All right, so I can tell you about this. This is the Jamaican hutia. It's also known as a coney. And we're talking about Google Earth, and we're looking at how Google Earth helps us to conserve these animals and other kinds of flora and fauna. So the hutia is endangered in Jamaica, and it has a very specific range. We're using Google Earth to look from the satellite imagery to see where these habitats might be and to see where human settlements are, and trying to understand the man-land conflicts or the man and wildlife conflicts that might exist. And this allows us to put up camera traps, understand the ranges, and see what's happening with the animals. I'm also going to take you through some examples of Google Earth in mission planning. So we're going to take a look at the national park boundary, and we're going to cue to a video. Right, so this is a Google Earth interface. Everybody's familiar with that. But what we're looking at is the national park, and we're now looking at the southern boundary of the national park. This is one of the more encroached areas, and as you can see, it's closer to the urban centers of Jamaica, closer to Kingston there. But we're zooming in on a section of about 9.5 kilometers that we see significant encroachment on. We did some surveying of this area so we can understand exactly where the boundaries are, and we put up these monuments. And then we're going back through to add signage to the area so that people can understand where the boundaries are, and they can understand, you're going into a national park, don't do anything bad in here. So we use Google Earth to kind of understand the context of the land, to understand the terrain. It might look pretty straightforward, but it's not when we start to use the profiling tool to see what the terrain is actually like. So that's a small section there, and these pointers that you're noticing, or these markers, is where we've added a lot of the signs. What we start to notice as well is this relationship between accessibility and where the encroachment happens. Of course, as I mentioned before, the terrain is very, very tricky, and it affects how we can get into the space and add these signs. It also affects how people use the space. Some areas are naturally protected, and some areas not so much. So you can see that cluster of signage right there. That's just below some of the areas of most significant encroachment. So we're going to move on from this video just to save a bit of time. And these are a couple of rangers out in the field doing very, very important work. We're going to go into our next video just to see how is it that we interpret the data when it comes back to us in office. So we're looking here at patrol observations, and we're looking at some of the data that's collected from the field. And these are simple observations, and it's just trying to understand what's happening in terms of land use. So the rangers go, they do patrols, they're collecting points on their GPS devices, and they're making notes on them. So all along this area is pretty much a patrol route, and they're making notes to say, okay, this is where we started. At this point, we've seen different kinds of degradation, maybe people cutting trees to burn coal, people clearing land for agricultural purposes. We might see evidence of tree cutting. We might see issues with the boundary itself. So we might see people actually moving some of these boundary monuments or signs, and those are things that we have to respond to. Just moving on quickly to save some more time. Right, so the last example I want to talk about is looking at land cover and land use. So we actually started exploring the voluntary market, the voluntary carbon market. And we're going to go into a video to show how we actually used Google Earth to have an idea of what the different types of land covers are, or the different classes. So, yeah, so pretty much we look at the satellite imagery from Google Earth, and we have an understanding of what's happening on the ground. So we look for these examples of different kinds of land uses. So the first examples that we're seeing now are within the national park boundary, and these are coffee farms. These are things that probably wouldn't necessarily stand out as different from forests to the untrained eye. But we who are familiar with the area, we can say, okay, there are rows of coffee plants among some of the trees. Some of these areas had been cleared before, and they are being cleared for agricultural purposes. So these are some of the examples that we collected. We did ground truthing just to confirm and collect some data. Unfortunately, we were not successful with our feasibility study. There are a couple of issues that we had in the assessment, and some of it had to do with the resolution of the activities or the scale of the activities, actually. And just want to move on quickly just to show kind of what's our next steps and some of the thinking that we have coming up. So where do we go from here? Just want to say that I've been really, really impressed by a lot of the great work that people are doing here at Google and Geo4Good. But what we're trying to do is get a better understanding of the drivers of environmental change. We want to be able to assess the effectiveness of our conservation strategies. Are these things working? Are they not? What kind of metrics can we implement to understand these changes? We want to see what's possible with higher resolution imagery, and we want to see how best can we use all this data together. So all the data that we're getting from field reports, from patrols, from satellite imagery, how can we put it all together and get some assistance in our strategy to have a better direction in terms of conservation? Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks so much, David. Wonderful. Another round of applause. So I recommend that if you're interested in any of these speakers, go and find them in the hallways, find them in the demos and drink, or I guess we already had the demo and drink section, but find them in the hallways and find them in the sessions. We're gonna have a whole lineup of 30 by 30 track today here in this room, so it's gonna be exciting. So now I'm gonna hand it back to our wonderful MCs, Karen and Michael.
Thanks, Tanya, and thanks to all our speakers. Okay.
You've seen it before. We're doing it again. We did the first two. We're gonna have breakouts. And 10:15, we're all gonna jump out of here. Not all of us, some of us will stay here. You'll stay here if you want to see the environmental APIs. These are new and exciting, the solar and air quality APIs. It's a deep dive on those environmental APIs, figuring out how to use them, get started. Then there's Earth Engine scaling and debugging in Discovery A, making your scripts run bigger, figuring out what to do when things go wrong. And then we did a little shuffle here. So in Atlantis, there's the intro to Earth Engine commercial. So that's using Earth Engine operationally or commercially, and learning how to become an Earth Engine partner organization to help drive sustainable impact and public sector work.
That's right. So if you guys wrote down your rooms previously, which room you were going to go to this morning, make sure you check the agenda or make sure you're in the right room, because we did a little room shuffling, as he said. So in Enterprise, we'll have the 5th session of 8 for LCMS, and this one will cover model calibration and model application. And then in Discovery B, we'll have imagining the role of Gen AI and LLMs. This is going to be similar to yesterday's geovisualization discussion and product ideation. This session will not be recorded because it's so interactive, and it will be first come, first serve. Overflow seating will not be available. It's a slightly bigger room to enable a couple more people, so hopefully that will work. And then at 11:30, we're going to go from our breakout session and we're going to start our applied solutions tracks. And to introduce these, I'd like to invite Eugene Ye up. He's the best person to introduce these to you. He's our director of go-to-market and solutions. And he's going to come up here and say a few words. So please welcome Eugene.
Big hand for Eugene.
Good morning, day 3. Losing a little bit of voices. I'm sure all of you getting a little tired, but very excited for the last day. My mind is blown every time I take a look and see the amount of science that's coming out of this community. It is truly inspirational, and as like an individual prior to joining this team and this effort, it's not something you get to see all the time because it's not always in front of the public. And so thank you all so much for taking the time to be here and for participating in all these sessions. And as Karen mentioned, I'm super excited about the new sessions that we're putting together later this morning and this afternoon. My name's Eugene. I lead go-to-market and solutions for geosustainability. My team works incredibly closely with Rebecca, with Karen, with Rally, with Michael, and their extended teams. And our goal is to ensure that a lot of the solutions that we're building here actually land in the commercial and public sector space and drive the impact that we all are trying to do. And that is incredibly important for us as we think about the diverse set of communities that we need to engage in order to actually achieve the goals that we set out. And in my time with the team, which has been about a year now, again, my mind is blown by this broad community and the extended community of folks that can't even attend and be here physically in person. This includes everyone from the scientific community to the nonprofit community, the IPLC community, everyone working together to solve these problems that, again, as a human, you feel like you really, really want to make sure they're solved and you're not quite sure how you can do it all the time. And our hope is, as we think about, as Rebecca calls it, the 5 slices of the pizza, we can bring this community together as well as the commercial and public sector groups and begin to have everyone aligned on some goals and some impact-driven activities that we can actually do collectively. And so as our team has expanded into more of this world, as we've launched more of these products, you'll hear about some, as we had mentioned, the environmental APIs, even Earth Engine itself going into commercial GA. We're beginning to see that there is this intense desire from the public sector and the commercial sector to actually begin to do good in their mission. And it's becoming quite integrated into the day-to-day businesses. We've talked to some of the largest beverage manufacturers, we've talked to financial sector, we've talked to consumer packaged goods companies, and even behind closed doors, they're not talking about just doing these activities to do these activities because they need press. They're talking about it because they really want to make this impact and change. However, what they're saying is that there are gaps. The science and a lot of the offerings just don't exist for them to do the things that they want to do. They have budget available, they have people available, they just can't do it. And there is this tremendous opportunity that is in front of us that we can bring this together. There are organizations out there that want to take advantage of the information and capabilities that you've all developed to actually change the way they operate their business. And the thing that really excited me about joining this team and this opportunity was to think about what that could mean. Think about what it means to change how every consumer packaged good on the planet, producer on the planet, sources raw commodities. That combined with a lot of the other activities we're driving in terms of jurisdictional red and other nature-based solutions is how we bring the ecosystem together and create the impact that we all want to have. And so for us, this is not a change in the community, it's an expansion of it. How can we open the doors even wider and be even more inclusive to everyone who's trying to solve these problems together? And what role can we all in this room play, including Google, in facilitating that transition? And that's why we're really excited to talk about the applied solution tracks this afternoon, as well as the new, as mentioned, product offerings that we're going to also talk about. And there's a few sectors and areas that we as Google are trying to lean more into because we feel like there's a tremendous opportunity here to actually deliver impact. I want to call out forest, agriculture, and sustainable sourcing. There's a European regulation for deforestation that is on the books that every consumer packaged good company that is dealing with these select raw commodities has to comply with. We've spoken to hundreds of these organizations, and they can't solve it. They don't know how to do it. They want to do it. They really can't quite figure out how to do it. There's a gap in science. There's a gap in technology. There's a gap all around. And we want to bring this community together with those customers and prospects and figure out how we can do that. How can we achieve this mission of truly creating sustainable raw materials? We also have a session on climate and carbon, as I mentioned, including red. We have climate risk and adaptation, and we have 30 by 30 and nature protection. In all of these sectors, we're beginning to see tremendous progress. We're beginning to see a lot of the science that has come out of this community get adopted and actually change what's happening in the planet, which is just, again, mind-boggling. But we also want to highlight where there's an opportunity for us to create that closed loop. How can we share back with all of you what the customers and entities in the commercial and public sector are struggling with so that as you think about the next set of innovations that you're able to deliver to the world, someone on the other end can receive it, take it, and actually change what's actually happening in the field. And our hope is that, again, as an expansion of this community, we're going to be able to help guide some of that impact. But again, a lot of this is a community-to-community discussion, and we're really hopeful that all the slices of the pizza, all the slices of the pie can all come together and work collaboratively. And if you have any questions or thoughts or concerns, we know that this is going to be, an expansion of what we do. Would love to hear feedback, how we can do better, what can Google do to support. I'm here all day. I've been here all week. Would love to talk with any and all of you regarding these topics, and would be very excited to see if there's any ideas that we can all work together on in the near future. So thank you very much.